Hey, welcome back to Bob's Two-Car Garage. I want to show you this cool old wood that I found. Came from a water tower that we had to tear down just south of us. It used to be a ranch, but the houses all grew up around it, so it was kind of sad that they had to tear down the water tower, but we ended up with this cool old redwood. That's old growth redwood. Really nice when you plane it down. It's got the lines in it from where the steel bands held that water tower together on the outside, and on the inside it's got these cool markings from where the water dried up on the inside. Anyhow, I want to do something cool with this. I'm going to make a coffee table out of it, so I'll have something in my house that reminds me of old California. Stick around, I'll show you how it happens. Hi, my name is Bob, and I love my two-car garage. I'm going to start off by cutting the pieces for my top, 40 inches long. So these 4 pieces are going to be my top. It's a little bit wide right now, so I'm going to rip a little bit off of each side. Also, because this used to be a water tower, there's a little bit of a bevel on each edge, so I got to cut that off. I'm laying this out just to see what it looks like, and I really like these little bands right here, but I think they're going to go away for the most part when I sand it off, so I'm not going to try to line them all up. But this is my layout. Once you start working with this redwood, it's really cool stuff. It's really tight grain and nice red, dark color. On the back side, it's got this this kind of mess that happened from the water. It looks like dried up mud, and I thought it would look cool, but it just kind of falls off, so I think I'm going to have to plane it off. And plus, all the thicknesses here are different, which is pretty typical of old wood, so I'm going to go ahead and plane the back side of these boards, and just to clean them up and make them all even, so it's going to be easier to glue it up. You want the grain of the wood on the end here to alternate. And I drew on here what this grain looks like. It goes this way, it goes this way, it goes this way, and it goes this way. So these two probably should be flipped, but if I flip them, then I'm not going to get that pretty little banding that I want on top. So I'm going to leave it like this. But by alternating the direction of the end grain there, you'll keep it from warping in the wrong direction. This wood is old and really dry, so I don't think it's going to be a big problem. Plus, it is going to be fastened down, so I think I'm going to be good. I am not going to use any biscuits or pocket hole screws or anything else. I'm just going to glue it, clamp it, and let it dry. And that works. Notice I'm using clamps top and bottom and alternating them and tightening them from one end to the other. Alright, so I let it dry overnight, and it's looking good. I'm going to unclamp it and go on to the next phase. I cut off the uneven ends with my handy dandy Makita battery powered circular saw. I love that little tool. Use a lot. I'm testing out my assertion right now that the wood is weaker than the glue joint. Let's see what happens. Well, it did break pretty close to the glue joint, but not exactly on the glue joint. So, not really a conclusive test. Let's try it again. That time it broke way far away from the glue joint. Let's try it again. Way far away from the glue joint. Of course, it could have something to do with where I hit it with a hammer, so I'm not sure if this is a really scientific test at all. Anyhow, that's what I've been told. So I cut a piece for this end and this end, and these two pieces are going to get glued and clamped, and probably I'm going to use some pocket hole screws to attach these pieces to the end. Whenever you're gluing up end grain like this, you want to make sure that you use plenty of glue. I'm even going back and giving the end grain a double coat of glue. In this case, those pocket hole screws might actually be adding some structural value to the joint. Screws I'm using here are 1.5-inch face frame screws with coarse threads. Coarse threads are better in softwood. All right, so here's the top all glued up, and it is 2/3 the size of the couch, which is kind of the rule. It's 40 inches long, and it is 19 inches wide. I know that this looks kind of cool just like it is, but honestly, I think this old weathered wood look is gonna go out of fashion pretty soon. So I'm gonna actually sand this down to the pretty part of the wood. I'm gonna try to leave some of this in there just so I can remember that this used to be an old water tower, but for the most part, I'm gonna sand this down to the nice red pretty part of the wood. So I think that's as far as I'm going to sand this down. You can still see some of the rough spots in the wood, and where the metal bands used to be, I can still see a few places where there's some bug holes and even maybe some old nail holes. I'm not going to sand it anymore because I do want it to look like it used to be something else. So that's it right there. That's all I'm doing with the 80 grit. Then I'm going to come back with some 100 and 120, maybe even 150, and make the grain of that wood even pop a little bit more. I want the height of my coffee table to be no higher than the sofa that's in front of, possibly a couple of inches lower. So in this case, I'm going to make this 18 inches high. So these are the legs and the rails for the sides, and the question is now, how am I going to join this together? I could just use pocket hole screws, but I'm convinced that mortise and tenons are better. So I'm for sure going to use mortise and tenon up here. I might use pocket hole screws on this bottom rail, but that side, the top side, gets a mortise and a tenon. We'll do that right now. Whenever I assemble mortise and tenons, I always assemble them dry first, just to make sure that I've cleaned out that mortise real well. I put glue on both surfaces, both the mortise and the tenon, but I don't want any puddles in the bottom of the joint that might keep it from going together properly. So I'm spreading out the glue with either just my finger or a throwaway chip brush. And I'm using 2-inch screws in these pocket hole screws. And again, I'm using coarse threads. All right, I'm gonna take my favorite little router here, and I'm gonna round off a lot of these edges with a little, I don't know, I think it's about a 5/16 radius. This is gonna be the rear rail. I'm gonna hold this a 1/2 inch back on each side. And on the inside, I'm gonna screw this rail to the two ends with some pocket hole screws. Now I needed to make a framework to hold up my drawers, and I did that with soft maple and attached the frame to itself with pocket hole screws. Then I attached the framework to the sides that I had already assembled and the rear rail with 2-inch pocket hole screws. These are the drawers that I made for the coffee table here, and I'm not going to show you how to do that because I did a whole video on that before, but I want to say just a couple things. Number one, I use what's called a locking rabbet joint, which I think works really great. Haven't glued them up yet, but that's the kind of joint that I used. Also, I used this Baltic birch. It has 9 plies in it, which makes great drawer material. And when you cut the bottoms for these drawers, make sure you use the splitter on your table saw or the riving knife, because I've had these pieces of these thin pieces of plywood just take off across the street and hit the neighbor's car on the other side of the street. So make sure you take special safety precautions when you're cutting the bottoms. Now, because I'm using wood drawer guides here, I got some options. This center one right here has about a 1/16 of an inch clearance on both sides. I put this piece in here to divide up the drawer space, and I think I'm just going to let that be like that. And there's about, I'll leave about a 1/16 of an inch on top as well, and that should slide out pretty easily. On the sides here, I'm going to groove the side of the drawer and then put a wood strip on both sides to create my drawer guide system for these two outside drawers. So this is what I'm doing on these side drawers. I cut these little strips of wood. They're gonna go in there like that. And on both sides, this side had to be a little wider to even up the drawer a little bit. And then I'm gonna tack that in on each side and then put a little screw in there. It's gonna be slightly higher than, well, it's going to be just high enough to hold the drawer from rubbing on the bottom right there. So the way I usually like to put on drawer fronts is to just cut them as close as I can and hold them in place and eyeball the reveal and then shoot a little nail right in there like that. And that will hold it in position temporarily for me until I put a screw in from the back side. Now you can see that little nail hole. Now I needed to make a framework to hold up these planks, and I did that with a front rail out of Redwood and rear rail out of Redwood, and then in between I cut some hardwood and attach that to the front and rear rail with pocket hole screws. And I came back and attached that framework to my legs with some wood screws as well. I actually resawed some of these 2x to almost a 1/2 inch, and those are going to go in there. After I was sure that all my planks down below fit properly, I flipped this thing over and screwed them on from the bottom to that framework that I had made with some 1-inch wood screws. I'm getting ready to attach the top, and when you attach the top, you don't want to just screw it on there solid from the bottom like with pocket hole screws or something like that, because the wood is going to expand and contract, and you have to allow for that. So there's a couple things you can do. I bought this little piece of hardware right here. I'm going to use this. Or you can also do something like this. I made this coffee table back in 1987, and I initialed it for me and my wife. But what I did is I grooved it right here along the edge, and then I made these little blocks that fit the groove and screwed to the top. And so as that wood expands and contracts, it'll slip. So in order to do that, you've got to have a groove or some kind of slot right here on the rail or on the legs in order to accommodate either those little wood pieces or this little piece of hardware. Now, you can do that with a router now, or you could do it ahead of time, which would be easier, or you could do it on a table saw ahead of time, which would be easier. I knew that I had a biscuit joiner, so I'm going to take my biscuit joiner and I'm going to put some little slots around the outside edge of these legs and that back rail, and then I'm going to attach the top with these little fasteners. At that point, the whole thing was ready for finishing. I didn't use any stain, of course, because it already looked so good, just all by itself. Sanded this with some 220 sandpaper after I sprayed it with some lacquer sanding sealer. I'm going to give it another coat of sanding sealer just to make sure I didn't miss any places. And then I'm going to spray it with a satin lacquer. Now, I'm spraying it because I have a sprayer. But if you don't have a sprayer, you could roll on with a foam roller, some polyurethane. I think I'd use a water base just because it's a little clearer. Getting all the little imperfections out, all the places where dust is settled, any place where the grain of the wood is raised. Now that I got this all finished up, I'm going to put a little beeswax on my drawer guides that I invented there, or didn't really invent them, but I did them. So I'm going to rub a little beeswax here, a little beeswax here. It's going to help it just slide a little bit better. Oh yeah, that works nice. Last thing I have to do is put these pretty little sort of black knobs on the front of each drawer. So I really like the way this turned out. I think I left just enough kind of oldness in it so it looks cool. I like the nice rich color that it ended up with, and it's gonna fit really well up in the loft where I'm gonna put it. I want to leave you today with this proverb that says, when a good man dies, he leaves an inheritance for his grandchildren. Now, don't plan on dying anytime soon, but I kind of hope that they like some of the stuff that I left them, because it won't be a whole lot of money, just a whole bunch of furniture that I put together. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.